welcome to another edition of Lightest and Best, where we look at a variety of knife manufacturers' lightest and best offerings. And today we're looking at the knife manufacturer Chris Reeve. We're going to be looking at his Inkosi. And you may say, hey, hold on, the Inkosi is not the lightest offering. The lightest offering is the Menandi. However, one of the things that we do at Lightest and Best is we believe in reviewing EDC knives, and the Menandi at one point had a nail nick that was sharp and you could deploy it with a nail nick. Now you have to use a pinch grip, and it's kind of a two-step process to deploy the Menandi. Even though the Menandi is 1.5 ounces and the Inkosi is 2.2 to 2.3, depending on which author you read. We excluded the Menandi. Maybe I'll do a review on it later. And then you think about the lightest and best of Chris Reeve. Well, hey, isn't the best of Chris Reeve the small Sebenza? After all, the Sebenza Smooth, the Sebenza Lockup. Well, the Sebenza 25, which later became the Inkosi, has many improvements over the Sebenza. And so we'll be talking about the Sebenza and comparing it. But today we're going to be talking about the Inkosi. And I have the Inkosi both in the carbon fiber and in the titanium version. The titanium version is 3 ounces even, and the carbon fiber is 2.2 to 2.3 ounces. So it saves, just by the one carbon fiber scale, 1/4 of the weight. So we're going to be looking at the carbon fiber version primarily. To give a little background, Chris Reeve is a knife maker from South Africa based in Boise, Idaho. He's been making knives since 1984. He started his business actually producing and selling them in 1987. In 1991, he introduced the Sebenza, and here is an example of the small Sebenza, and that became the icon of knifedom. Many people feel this to be the best knife, not only in the Chris Reeve lineup, but also in the world. In 2001, he introduced the Menandi, which I showed to you earlier. And then in 2008, he introduced the the Sebenza 21. He had been in business for 21 years. At that point is why he called it the Sebenza 21. And that's what we recognize as the modern day Sebenza. And then in 2012, he introduced the Sebenza 25. It was the 25th year in business, and he made improvements upon the Sebenza, he felt. And the smaller version, the scaled-down version of the 25, became called the Inkosi, which is what we're going to be looking at today. And in 2015, he introduced this Inkosi, which in Zulu means chief. It was a smaller version of the Sebenza 25, and it's also the year that Chris Reeve went into semi-retirement and passed off the day-to-day operations to other people. So let's talk about the knife. The blade length, we'll go over the specifications. The blade length is 2.8 inches. The handle length is 3.75 inches. And the total knife length is 6.5 inches. And the weight, as I'd mentioned, is 2.2 to 2.3 ounces. We'll compare it with a variety of other commonly known knives. First of all, the Mini Griptilian is similar in size. However, the Mini Griptilian is just a little bit larger. There's the Hinder Half Track, which is approximately the same size, although it's a little bit chunkier of a knife. And there is the Kershaw Leek. This is in the S35V, which is a little bit longer. The Spyderco Delica is a longer knife as well. And then, of course, the Sebenza is a little bit longer than the Inkosi. The blade of the Inkosi is made from S35V steel, which is a very good steel. The method of deployment is by bilateral thumb stud. And that's one of the things that distinguishes it from the original Sebenza. The original Sebenza only has a unilateral thumb stud made for right-handers. They make a left-handed version, but none of the Sebenzas have bilateral thumb studs. The handle on this version is made from carbon fiber and then titanium on the lock bar side. The pivot is phosphobron washers, and the lock bar has no over travel stop with the exception of the canted clip now, which rests on the frame but also functions as an over travel stop. The pocket clip is an embedded titanium spring clip, and it's right hand tip up only. And because it's embedded, as you can see, it only needs one screw to secure it. The ergonomics of the knife are just okay. It's similar to the Sebenza 25, as I've mentioned. However, it looks like they just took the CAD drawing of the 25 and shrunk it down 3/4 size and called it a day. As a result, the distance for the first finger hole is only 1/2 inch, and I have small hands and really it's hard to get my finger in there. I would want to compare it with the half track of Hinder. And the Hinder in their finger choil, they give a full 1 inch. And even somebody with a very chunky finger can get their hand in there. Whereas the Sebenza, if you don't have small hands, the little apice here is going to poke into your flesh. Simple is usually better. If we can look at the Sebenza design, which they were trying to prove upon, it has about a 3/4 inch opening, and then it's just flat. And your finger fits nicely there. Also an advantage of the Sebenza is that when you slide your finger down with your eyes closed, it just meets the thumb stud and you can flip it out like that. Whenever you have the Inkosi closed and you try to run your finger down there, it swoops it away from the thumb stud. So you have to kind of jam it between the frame and the thumb stud in order to flip it out. That's just one of the downsides. The action is smooth and the lockup is bank vault-like. Let's discuss the differences between the Inkosi and the Sebenza, because basically they designed the Inkosi trying to make improvements upon the Sebenza. First of all, as you can see, the Inkosi has a much larger pivot than the Sebenza, and it has a thicker blade stock. The Inkosi's blade stock is 1/28 1/1000 thick, and the Sebenza has a 1/25 1/1000 thick blade stock. The Inkosi has a little bit shorter blade. It's 2.8 inches long instead of the Sebenza's 2.94 inches long, and the overall length of the Sebenza is a little longer as well. It's a 3/8 of an inch longer than the Inkosi. The pocket clip rides on the frame, and this is a good improvement. As you can tell, the Sebenza had a pocket clip that rode on the lock bar. There's a theoretic disadvantage in that if you're trying to deploy it and you're grabbing it, you're actually pressing the lock bar against the blade and making harder for the blade to escape the handle. With the Inkosi, they improved that. They canted it diagonally so that the tip of the clip rests on the frame, so that whenever you grab and grip the knife, you're pressing on the frame instead of the lock bar. Also, by doing this, they let part of the lock bar overhang the clip so that it functions as an over travel stop functionally. Good design. And as I've mentioned, with the Sebenza, there was a unilateral thumb stud. In the Inkosi, they added bilateral thumb studs so left-handers can open it a little easier. And as I've also mentioned, the Sebenza had a very plain, flat handle, and with the Inkosi, they put scalloping for places to rest your finger. And for me, it's not quite as comfortable, but it's just a design decision that they made. Another thing that happened between the Sebenza and the Inkosi is the Inkosi basically has 2 points of attachment, the pivot and the standoff on the handle. The Sebenza has the pivot, the external lock bar, the standoff, and also they have a lanyard tube. See if you can see this a little better here. And with the Inkosi, they did away with the lanyard tube. It wasn't really necessary. One of the ways they did it is instead of a flat rounded standoff, they have an hourglass standoff, and you can just hook your lanyard around there. And really, the blade doesn't come that close to the lanyard to be a danger of cutting your lanyard. And also they placed a floating stop pin. As you can see in the regular Sebenza, there's a place to put a torque wrench on it. And with the Inkosi, there's a place to put a torque wrench only on the lock bar side, and it just fits into this machined hole and it can float back and forth. It's not fixed, so that's not a point of attachment at all with the Inkosi. And one of the things I wanted to talk about that is my favorite feature of the Inkosi is that it has a ceramic detent ball which functions both as the detent ball and the over travel stop. I'm going to try to get a macro and see if I can see. But you see at the very end of the lock bar, there's a little bump there. And I'll display on the screen a macro still shot of the embedded detent ball at the end of the lock bar that they use. But one of the things, everyone talks about Sebenza smooth, and I want to describe that to you. With the Sebenza, you have a common detent ball. And so you have, when you deploy the knife, you have two thunks. Thunk, thunk. So at about 160 degrees, the blade falls off the blade tang and has a thunk at about 160 degrees. And then you have another thunk whenever it locks up at 180 degrees. I call this the detent angle. And various knives have different detent angles. One of the largest detent angles that I can think of is in the Hoback MK Ultra. It has a full, I'm going to say 130 degree detent angle because they put the detent ball more medially on the lock bar. There is a thunk and then a thunk. So all knives that have frame locks or liner locks have this situation where the detent ball will fall off and they'll have that two thunk situation in their opening. The Inkosi solved that because they put the detent ball at the very end of the lock bar, and so when you open it, you only have one click. The detent ball falls off of the blade tang and locks up the blade tang at the very same time. And so many knives will have an insert here of steel that interfaces with the blade pane so that the titanium lock bar won't be rubbing against the blade tang. Obviously the steel is stronger than the titanium. It's harder and will wear away the tang, the lock bar theoretically over time. So instead of that, they use the ceramic ball as their lock bar insert. So it has two functions, both as the detent ball and as the lock bar insert. And in doing that, they made this knife the smoothest opening knife on the market. I know of no other manufacturer that does that. It's really brilliant. So, what are my overall impressions of the Inkosi? I think it's a great knife. Are there opportunities for improvement? Certainly. I think if they ditched the idea of the contoured handle grooves and just went with the Sebenza's simple handle, where it only has one place for the forefinger and then it's straight otherwise, it would have been great. However, that's a design choice that they make. The other thing that I think that could be an improvement is that they could have used a contoured pivot on one side. With the way it is now, and one thing I like about Chris Reeves is that they include tools so that you can disassemble their knife. And they manufacture them with such tight tolerances that you can assemble this and disassemble it and reassemble it. And it's going to be the same lockup, the same perfect blade centering time after time. But you need two tools to disassemble, one to put in here and then one to undo the pivot. One of the ways knife manufacturers do it, and this is a really inexpensive knife. I'm going to shame the expensive knife makers with the inexpensive ones. This is a Kershaw Oh-So Sweet. One side of the pivot has their Torx bit, and then the other side they have contoured into a hexagonal fitted nuts so that you don't have, it has its own stop there. You don't have to put a tool in. And to do this, you really need 3 hands. You need one hand to hold the knife and another hand to hold the pivot here, and then another hand to decide to disassemble the pivot. So if they did the way that Kershaw did it with this very simple design on a very cheap knife, it would be easier for all of us to disassemble and reassemble our knives. What do I like about the knife? First of all, I like it for its lightness. With the carbon fiber version of the Inkosi, it only weighs 2.2 to 2.3 ounces. I like its simplicity also. Really, this only has 2 attachment points, the pivot and 1 standoff. Simple is good. I love it. And the Inkosi, as well as all Chris Reeve knives, are simple and well made with tight tolerances. You can take them apart, and when you put them together, you know that they're going to fit well. Also, I like the Chris Reeve warranty because they encourage you to disassemble the knife so that you can clean it. And they even include lubrication, they include wrenches that you can disassemble it with. There are other knife makers such as Spyderco and Medford that discourage the disassembly of their knife, and they even say that it'll void their warranty. And I like the ethic that Chris Reeve has of encouraging you to disassemble their knives. And one of the best things I like is the smoothness of the knife on opening it. Sebenza has its reputation for being Sebenza smooth. The Inkosi is even smoother because with its distal ceramic detent ball functioning as a insert for the blade tang also, it has become the smoothest knife in the industry. With the exception of the grips on the handle, I like every improvement that they made on the Sebenza. They took what many consider to be the best production knife in the world, which was the Sebenza, and they made it better. So now, what's the best production knife in the world? I'll let you decide.